Thank you. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Court, from the presentations you heard yesterday, there can be no doubt that the Tatmada's clearance operations in Minji, Chatpin, Mangnu, and 4 other villages that Mr. Njai discussed were carried out with extreme brutality. The UN fact-finding mission reported that a similar and strikingly similar modus operandi was employed in at least 54 other Rohingya villages, and it concluded that the extreme brutality with which these operations were carried out across northern Rakhine State was a compelling indicator of Myanmar's genocidal intent. In its words, genocidal intent was evident in the Tatmada's extreme brutality during its attacks on the Rohingya. The Court is now well aware of the underlying facts, so let us turn to the jurisprudence. It is beyond dispute that the brutality of an attack on a protected group constitutes evidence of genocidal intent. The Court itself recognized in Croatia versus Serbia that genocidal intent can be inferred from, quote, the scale and allegedly systematic nature of the attacks. The fact that those attacks are said to have caused casualties and damage far in excess of what was justified by military necessity. The specific targeting of members of the protected group and the nature, extent, and degree of the injuries caused to the protected population. The ICTY and the ICTR have also found genocidal intent based on the brutality of an attack, not only through the attack scale and those targeted by it, but also because of the extent and the degree of injury which the attack caused to its victims. Each of these hallmarks of brutality evidencing genocidal intent is present in this case. Myanmar's clearance operation is large-scale and systematic. It caused civilian casualties and destruction far beyond any military necessity. They targeted the most vulnerable members of the Rohingya group, and they were deliberate and extreme in their cruelty. I begin with the scale and systematic nature of the crimes against the Rohingya. The ICTR trial chamber in the Nadine Dabahazi case explained that an attack on several thousand members of an ethnic group is itself indicative of the requisite intent to destroy that group in whole or in part. Similarly, the trial chamber found in the Akayesu case that an attack on a massive scale indicated that the massacres were aimed at exterminating the group. Our case fits the description here. As Mr. Lowenstein explained yesterday, in 2 waves of the clearance operation, Myanmar mounted a systematic and large-scale attack against the Rohingya. The UN fact-finding mission concluded that while the exact number of casualties may never be known, the clearance operations that started on the 25th of August 2017 alone have directly resulted in more than 10,000 deaths, an estimate it considered to be conservative. The United States Department of State's report found that the attacks were extreme, large-scale, and widespread. 1 in 5 witnesses interviewed had seen a mass casualty event of killings or injuries with more than 100 victims. The Holocaust Memorial Museum also found that, quote, the Myanmar's army attacks against the Rohingya population were both widespread and systematic. I now turn to the second aspect of Myanmar's brutality, which evidences genocidal intent: casualties and destruction far beyond any military necessity. In Bosnia versus Serbia, the court recalled the ICTY's findings that the executions in Srebrenica systematically targeted Bosnian Muslim men of military age, regardless of whether they were civilians or soldiers, with no effort to distinguish between them. The ICTY treated this pattern of indiscriminate targeting as probative of the intent to destroy the Bosnian Muslims in Srebrenica, in whole or in part. This court accepted the same factor as an indicator that genocidal intent was present in the particular circumstances of Srebrenica. The Tatmadaw too systematically targeted civilians with no effort to distinguish between civilians and RSF fighters. You will recall this excerpt from the UN Fact-Finding Mission's 2018 report. There was not the least effort on their part, that is the Tatmadaw's part, to make any distinction between RSF fighters and civilians, or to specifically target a military objective or identify and repel an immediate threat. Everyone was a target, and no one was spared. Later today, Mr. Sulman will explain why Myanmar's clearance operations were not counter-terrorism operations. Myanmar consistently employed at least 4 methods of violence that reveal an intent to kill as many Rohingya civilians as possible. You already heard yesterday evidence of 3 of them: indiscriminate shootings, burnings to death, and targeted executions. There is ample evidence that these methods were repeated in multiple Rohingya villages, which will be included in the footnotes of the compte rendu. Mr. President, attacks on escape corridors is the 4th modus operandi consistently employed by the Tatmadaw. Even after forcing the Rohingya to the Bangladesh border, the Tatmadaw was not satisfied. They wanted the Rohingya dead. As the UN fact-finding mission determined, Tatmadaw soldiers shot at groups of Rohingya who were en route. At times, these attacks occurred in villages that were already burned, where fleeing Rohingya were seeking refuge on their journey. At other times, attacks took place in forested areas, or when Rohingya were forced into the open, for example, when crossing rivers. The Tatmadaw turned border crossing points with Bangladesh into killing fields, opening fire on enormous crowds of desperate Rohingyas. On one occasion, Myanmar Navy sank 4 boats full of refugees. A survivor recalled, "There were so many bodies and so much blood in the river. It looks like the river was bleeding." Where the Tatmadaw did not shoot fleeing civilians, it starved them. Along the Naf riverbank, on the Myanmar side, soldiers cordoned off the Rohingya waiting to cross, denying them food and medical care and leaving them to die slowly from hunger and disease. Journalists Alex Crawford and Neville Lazarus of Sky News, who reached Dang Khali Saw in Mangdor Township, described in their witness statement hundreds of desperate Rohingya trapped on the beach, some stranded for weeks, others for months, begging for help, holding out their children, the elderly, the wounded. They learned that thousands more were pinned along that strip of sand. These methods of extreme brutality, which were repeatedly and consistently deployed by Myanmar, produced casualties far beyond any conceivable notion of military necessity. Taken together, they reveal a deliberate design to destroy the Rohingya as a group. Mr. President, I turn to the 3rd marker of extreme brutality, indicative of genocidal intent: the deliberate targeting of the most vulnerable members of a protected group. I am speaking here of the wholesale slaughter of children, pregnant women, as well as the elderly, people who posed no conceivable threat. This abhorrent conduct served no military purpose, or indeed any non-genocidal purpose. The ICTR trial chamber in Akiesu underscored that the targeting of newborn babies and pregnant women on grounds that the fetuses in their wombs were fathered by Tutsi men showed an intention to wipe out the Tutsi group in its entirety. Likewise, the ICTY found in Popovich that the killings of some children, elderly and infirm, alongside the systematic execution of men and boys, suggested an intent to destroy the group as a whole. The UN fact-finding mission observed that the Tatmadaw targeted the most vulnerable, including children, women, and the elderly. The US Department of State similarly reported that the military specifically targeted those who were not able to dodge the attacks, often women, children, and the elderly. As you heard yesterday, there is extensive evidence of targeting of the elderly and pregnant women. You can find additional evidence cited in the footnotes in the transcripts. Mr. Lowenstein will present later this morning the legal conclusions to be drawn especially from the Tatmadaw's systematic, widespread, and deliberate targeting of Rohingya children and infants. The fourth and final hallmark of genocidal brutality, Mr. President, is the extreme cruelty with which an attack is conducted. Cruelty betrays the perpetrator's animus towards the targeted group and a calculated intent to maximize suffering as a means to bring about the group's destruction. It also evidences the consequences of long-standing efforts to dehumanize the target group. As the ICTR chamber held in Kayishema, quote, the cruelty with which the attackers killed, wounded, and disfigured their victims indicates that the anti-Tutsi hate propaganda unleashed on Rwanda and the desired effect, namely the destruction of the Tutsi population. The evidence we have reviewed shows that the Tatmadaw set out to brutalize the Rohingya with maximum cruelty. Violence desired not just to kill, but to terrorize and dehumanize. As the UN fact-finding mission and others have laid bare, the atrocities were systematic and immense. People burned alive, often locked inside their homes before the houses were torched. Bodies slashed and mutilated with knives. Victims doused with petrol and set on fire. And young children and babies stabbed, beaten, cut to death in front of their parents. These already brutal killings were often accompanied by mutilation and dismemberment. In Kiet Yopin, a witness recounted at least 20 bodies in a field, their flesh cut into pieces. A witness from Labadam, Butidang Township described how the military cut the little children's bodies into pieces. Yet another survivor from Hun Ti Pien, Mountdall Township, watched soldiers seize a young man, cut his ears and nose, and slice his body with knives. Still in Kwandin village, Butidang Township, girls were abducted, their breasts and genitals cut, and they were beheaded. Witnesses described intestine pulled out and displayed, limbs, hands, and feet severed, eyes gouged out, even from children, men castrated, tongues and testes cut off. Survivors also described hundreds of body parts hanging from trees and heads floating in the river like footballs. A witness from Mountdall Township described the scene. I saw people without hands, with intestines pulled out, spread across the village. They shoot people. If they don't die, the military uses cobra knives to cut them. If the intestines don't come out, they pull them out. Mr. President, members of the court, extreme brutality of this scale and of this nature is not incidental to counterterrorism. It is the point. It tells you what the perpetrators intend to do, to destroy the Rohingya group as such. I thank you for your kind attention. May I request, Mr. President, that you call to the podium Ms. Pasipanushka.